January 14th, 2019 meeting of the East Penn School Board of Directors is hereby called to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order is request to address the board. I have none. Next is the approval of minutes. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next up, we have a couple of presentations. You want to introduce the
Thank you. First, I would like to introduce Laura Whitman, one of our assistant superintendents, who will lead us into the presentation on brand.
Thank you for your time this evening. I'd like to introduce you to key members of our communication core team. This group has existed for the last few years in order to improve district communication. Members of this group were instrumental in bringing consistency and a redesign to our school website after we received community feedback. As we worked on the sites for the 10 buildings, it became clear that we did not have one district logo or consistency among district publications. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to give you an overview of why we are bringing branding to your attention and possible next steps to move the district forward. It's my pleasure to introduce Erin Murphy, Curriculum Supervisor, and Dylan Peters, Tech Integration Specialist, who both serve on our core communications team.
Good evening. Through this presentation, we hope to highlight why we feel that branding is an important discussion for the East Penn team. We would also like to discuss the technical components the team would like to derive through the branding process. And since we're still in the formative phases of this experience, what we anticipate to be our next steps. When people think of branding, they often think of a company, for-profit, marketing, or sales. But many K-12 schools and even higher education have begun to see branding as the way that they tell their school's story. And that is really what we want to talk to you about today, because we think that we can do a better job telling East Penn's story.
Okay, so what is district branding? District branding is not a promotional effort or a way to market the school to a wider audience. Rather, it's a way to create an identity and tell a story of our district that includes both the vision and mission statement, the values, the reputation, and the work done inside of our classroom. On top of that, a logo to represent that. So if you were to go to Google and type in, what is East Penn School District's logo, you may come up with multiple examples. Here you're going to see just 4 different logos and variations that we have come up with. In these, you see different font styles, you see different shades of green, shades of gold. Some have the tagline, some don't. Some are stacked, some vertical, horizontal, all different. It's not very consistent. So why should we consider branding? First of all, transparency. Our brand should reflect, again, our mission statement, the values of the school district. Second, to be consistent across all mediums. That includes both print and digital. And then finally, when you have that transparency and consistency throughout, it creates a unity inside the community. Here are some examples of some printed materials that we send home. On there, we have our full-day kindergarten and our crisis assistant guide, and an example of some business cards. All these have different logos and different styles to them. And if we look at our social media here, we have a couple different logos, we have some different banners. Again, this is due to the availability and the dimensions needed for that said website. And finally, our most important, our #1 communication tool doesn't even have a logo on the main page. Again, it's because we lack that consistency across our district.
So as Laura mentioned, our website redesign really led us to question the absence of a consistent logo. Typically, when people think of a brand, they think of a logo, the symbol that people see when they think about your organization. The majority of districts have committed to a district logo. What we featured here are districts that have recently revised their district brand. In addition, we've also included each of the logos from the other Lehigh Valley school districts in your board packet. The communications core team really got started by listing technical components that we were hoping to derive from the branding process. We found that those components really fell into two categories, the logo and a style guide. We want a logo that can adapt to multiple physical variants so that it maintains its professional appearance across letterhead, website, social media platforms, flyers, newsletters, and just all of the places that people see East Penn. To anticipate future needs, we would like the logo to be available to us in various file formats, such as vector, PNG, JPEG, PDF, PSD, EPS, and in addition, to further enhance our brand, we want to commit to defined colors with corresponding code for print and web, and develop a consistent style guide, or font style. Due to the sheer scale of this project, including the file types that we're looking for, we want to make sure that we have a font that it does not is not restricted by copyright. So due to the scale of this project, we would really like to partner with an experienced company for this work. As we began our research by talking to other districts, we found that really others have spent a wide range of funds to brand their school. Based on our preliminary research, we feel that we can find a price that fits within our current community liaison budget for this school year, and that will remain our goal. After the communication team evaluates additional proposals, we hope to come back to you with an agreement from our selected provider. In the end, a logo is really just one piece of the district brand. Over the last 4 years, we have come a long way in telling our district story. We believe that adding a logo and enhancing our brand will reinforce our commitment to transparency and consistency to the East Penn community. Thank you.
Are there any questions on the presentation? Mr. Ballard?
Yes, currently we license our Hornets logo from Georgia Tech, I believe it is. And the question I have is the committee looking at possibly redrawing a Hornets logo so that we're not in that state of having borrowed somebody else's mascot, in other words, but still keeping the Hornets name?
We discussed that. We just put one of those on the turf field. So we were thinking we might hold off on the redesign for the athletics logo. And this year with the budget monies that we have, focus on the academic logo.
Okay. But you're keeping it in mind?
We are keeping it in mind. That would be something we'd have to budget for as well.
Okay. That's my only question.
Ms. Bowman?
How many things would have to change if we committed to one set of fonts and colors and one logo? How many signs? I understand the business cards, things like that, you could just flow them in eventually as you run out, but I'm thinking more of bigger things that would actually potentially cost more money than the actual redesign.
So again, I think with some of the paper products, we would just slowly, move those into play. One of the things that we did consider and that we do want to have funds for is now we're moving graduation to the PPL Center. And so we're really hoping by then we might be able to have a logo in place. And so a banner like that would be of a cost that we would factor into the cost of graduation. But again, what we found when we toured Emmaus High School is we have what's unique at East Penn is the elementaries have different colors and different mascots, which is not something, that you find common to every school district. And so they would still retain the mascot of their building and those colors and that identity. We weren't planning on doing that or addressing that, but more so unifying us under a district logo that would be used similar to what you see with Parkland School District.
So what would be the timetable?
Well, we'd like to come back. We have 2 more proposals to consider from outside companies. So we'd like to come back possibly as early as the next board meeting to present you with an agreement from one of those companies once we've completed reviewing the different agreements and sample work and some of the things that we're looking for.
I had several questions, actually. Let's just start with my first one. Who's responsible for the final selection of whatever the final design is going to be? Is that the committee? Is that coming to us for a vote? What does it look like?
We'd like the communications core team to bring a selection forward to the board. So we were hoping that, knowing again some of the other pieces that we have to consider, that we would work together as a communications core team to bring a selection.
Okay. Was there any consideration given to whether any local businesses or families of students in the district, or even better, was the graphics design program approach, and having the students design some of that?
Okay. So I'm going to address those separately.
Okay.
So first and foremost, I think the first thing the committee discussed was having a student design our logo. It definitely spoke to what our mission is for our district, but then when we considered all of the components that I explained earlier and thought about the actual time commitment that we would be putting upon a student or a group of students, we just didn't feel like it was a fair amount of time to request of our kids. And then in addition to that, also the technical components, we just felt like someone who went to school for graphic design, if it was going to be that long-term commitment, when student work is best utilized on something that's very timely. So like designing the cover of the graduation booklet or t-shirts for a fundraiser really are a good fit for using our kids' talents, where we felt like this was really something where we did want to partner with a company. And we love your question about partnering with a local company, because that has absolutely been our priority, is finding a local organization that we feel is invested in East Penn and our kids and our community here. That would be, if we can find a company to partner with that meets our requirements, that's local, I think that would be a priority.
Okay. Last question I had, you mentioned something about issues with fonts and potential copyright. What would help me understand what the challenge would be of using one of thousands of free fonts that are online already?
So that's a great question. And actually another reason why we felt like we should go with a company, in that a lot of times fonts are free for us to download and use. So if I wanted to use something in one of the presentations I did tonight, but when you read the fine print on those fonts, you actually can't use them for anything that will eventually be sold or something that's going to be displayed in front of a certain number of people. So in order for us to sort of not have to worry about all of that fine print, when you sort of put the choice of the font in the hands of the company, that legality part is on them. It's part of typically the proposal that they work up for your project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Munson?
Yeah, I just, two questions beyond just, I'm glad to see that the district is thinking about these kinds of issues. What kinds of changes will you have to make once your style sheet is in place and so forth, for how all the things that get produced from teachers all the way up to central administration, like how will that process have to change? Or is it going to become more difficult, more time consuming? Will people need approvals before things go out that's different than what you do today?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something that the committee has been discussing. I think that first and foremost, we would need to develop a process. So what that would look like. The training or the style guides that we've seen as samples really are very self-explanatory, which we think is great. One of the other things that we've considered with the companies we've discussed is using fonts that are readily available to us, so not things that we would need to have an administrative assistant downloading or anything like that. We would want to use something that is, again, readily available to them. And then we would develop some sort of process for them to follow. So, once you have the style guide in place, then maybe at first we may have the committee or a member of the committee be involved in coaching an administrative assistant or a teaching team until we build that capacity for them to be able to create products like that independently.
Great. And how about in terms of the budget? It's your current belief that you can have an outside vendor develop the logo design within the existing budget for community outreach, is that right?
Yes.
So what are we foregoing this year in community outreach that we could pay for, that these monies will now be used for the logo?
So I don't believe we're actually foregoing anything. Based on what happened to our Thanksgiving and our senior luncheon, we had a greatly reduced number of seniors attend because we had to move the date. So we saved some money, and that was typically coming from that budget. We also do things like the school calendar and some of those things from that budget, but we may be able to do some of those things differently. We've run into issues of not having like vector graphics of our own logo, and so there may be some things that we can do now internally that we couldn't before once we have all of those pieces. So we were doing things like tracing the Hornet to turn it into a vector graphic to make those pieces work.
Mr. Champagne?
I'm very supportive of this. I think it's a great idea to kind of unify things. I guess when you talked about what is district branding on page 3, you kind of crossed out what I thought was one of the more important aspects of branding, which is to actually market the district. And I feel like that's, well, the logo is a starting point. I hate to see you suddenly say we're not going to be out promoting the district, because we are in competition with other educational entities, and to promote this district and what its capabilities are and what its reputation is and how it can serve the students, I think is more important in my mind than picking a logo. I mean, getting a logo is great, but the real emphasis should be on how do we, try to bring kids into this district, because I think, there's probably a misconception on many people's part, or some people's part, of what public education can and cannot do, what technical education through LCTI can and cannot do. So I find that to me is almost more important, that should be where this focus should be once we, move past this than the logo. So, for my 2 cents.
Is there any other?
Thank you.
Mr. Ballard?
The issue on fonts also brought to mind something that we ran into in industry, where we're trying to save documents for 10, 20, 30 years and things like that. Fonts are very important to consider, from the fact that when you send a document out, such as a Word document, the font you use has to be available on the other end to be displayed correctly. So in many cases, choosing the font can mean whether it gets displayed correctly or not. And it also happens with PDFs. A lot of people don't understand that there's 2 ways to save, or actually 3 ways to save PDFs, and one of them includes the fonts with the PDF so it can be read by somebody else. But if it doesn't include the fonts, if it wasn't saved that way, then the fonts is picked from something, maybe, or it says it can't render the document. The archive format was called PDF-A, which is an archive format that includes the fonts of whatever the document was with the document you send out. And that's the only way you can ensure that people on the other end can actually read it the way you intended it to be read. And that then becomes the issue about, do you own the font? Did you get it from Microsoft Word, which has a number of free fonts in it, or did you pick up a font on the internet that may or may not be available to the other person, or may not be free? So I understand the problem with fonts. It's more complicated than people realize.
Sure, and to Dr. Munson's point, absolutely, once we have all of this in place, we're going to create a clear process so that issues like what you've described can be avoided.
You're going to give out a style manual, I presume, to every building and say, this is the way East Penn documents should be prepared.
Yes, we'll create a clear process, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I assume part of the process, either the style manual or something, perhaps you'll have a PowerPoint template or something. Is that something your committee would create, or is that something that the company that you're working with to develop the logo would create?
So that's a great question, and I think that and I know what you're speaking of, like when my husband creates PowerPoints for his company, it always comes in the clear template. I think that we would also be careful not to overstep and want to, remove creativity from people who would like to design really dynamic presentations. So I think that perhaps the committee will make a template available if people would like to use a template, but I think just the availability of a high-quality graphic that can be included in the template for for consistency purposes, would really help serve that purpose as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I'd like to thank you and your committee for your work, and we look forward to seeing what you come up with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is a presentation of the proposed preliminary budget.
No, back. It's okay.
Can you guys see the presentation if I sit here?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not that tall.
I know.
Mr. Fisher? Oh, Mr. Patton. Did you have a good, happy Christmas? New Year?
Good evening. On December 10th, almost a month ago, or a little over a month ago, Mr. Saul and I presented the 2019-2020 budget outlook, which, as we explained to the board and the community, was really intended to provide you with a high-level overview of our district budget. And throughout the district budget process, which will take place over the next several months, we, district administration, plan to continue to provide the board with ongoing updates on the budget, as well as provide you with greater details on those district priorities that we identified at our December meeting. Our presentation this evening will focus on the proposed preliminary budget, which you have, and Mr. Saul will highlight those financial items that have changed since the budget outlook in December. In addition, the board will consider the adoption of a resolution indicating that the district will not raise taxes by more than the adjusted Act 1 index. As we think about, as we discussed at the last meeting, the district has an overall goal to balance the short and long-term financial needs of the district with the priorities, and those priorities remain as safety and security and student wellness, continued implementation of a one-to-one learning environment, enhanced literacy resources, addressing some of our maintenance and other one-time costs, increasing capital reserves, as well as maintaining appropriate levels of fund balance and budgetary reserve. And as we think about, as I described, what we envision the next several months will look like in terms of the budget development process, again, tonight's focus is on the proposed preliminary budget as well as the resolution to not exceed the adjusted index. And then you can see there, we have planned a series of 4 brief presentations in which we, the district administration, will delve into those priorities that we've identified into a bit more detail. And our goal there would be to highlight the program or the personnel request, the level of needs, and the ways in which we envision or see that the priority addresses and fulfills those needs. So specifically, we plan to come back to the board in January at our upcoming board meeting on the 28th, and we'll focus on elementary personnel items. Specifically, we'll talk in greater detail about the guidance counselor, the school psychologist, and the staff assistant, followed by our February 11th budget update, at which time we'll talk about secondary personnel, the school nurse, the ESL teacher, and the learning support teacher. At the second board meeting in February, we will focus on our technology priorities, specifically the technology plan and the instructional technology specialist. And then at the March 11th board meeting, we will focus on facilities, specifically some of those maintenance and one-time expenditures. And we will also wrap that up with the long-range fiscal and capital plan as well. Ultimately, we hope that by June of 2019, as you can see there, that the board has a deep understanding of the budget and is prepared to make an informed decision on that budget.
Okay, so just a reminder on this slide, this demonstrates that when we had our financial statements audited for the year ending June 30th, 2018, our ending fund balance was $14,620,000. Again, on the next slide, that ending fund balance carries forward to become both the beginning fund balance and the ending fund balance, because we have a balanced budget in 2018-19. And that's important because then that will carry forward to the year that we're talking about, which is 2019-20. On the budget summary, a couple of items. Let me just flip my page. First, I wanted to point out, I'm sure you've noticed the note at the bottom, that any changes from the previous version, so the budget update that we presented in December, are noted in red to help point those out for you. Also, the presentation of this slide was simplified slightly by pulling out the priorities and the deferred maintenance and one-time expenditures and just including them directly in the expenditure line item. So again, in an effort to simplify this slide, as well as have the numbers correspond to the supporting schedule that you received in your budget document, in your board packet. In terms of the detail, since December, the changes have been in local revenue. The real estate tax rate decreased from 1.1% to 0.9%. While there was a decrease in the tax rate, there was a growth in the assessed value, the total assessment. That growth generated an additional $10,000. And again, you may recall from our previous discussion that when it comes to the real estate tax piece, that's the one piece of revenue we can control. So generally, we're backing into the tax rate that we need to balance the budget. In terms of a question of, well, how did we come up with the 10,000, that is what was needed to balance this budget. With state revenue, two items that changed were the state share of FICA. Again, if you recall, that state reimburses us roughly 50% of our FICA expenses. So we had a few additional, some additional costs in terms of wages, which generated additional FICA expenses, thereby additional reimbursement. On the retirement piece, there was a decrease in the employer contribution rate, which decreased the district's overall expense for retirement, and so we had a decrease in the reimbursement that we received from the state. In terms of the FICA, that was an additional roughly $680, and the retirement was a reduction of $159,000. So in terms of revenue, the total reduction was $148,000. Looking at the expenditures, the wages, there was an additional $70,000 for athletic game workers, an item that we identified that had not been budgeted. In fact, when we look back the last few years, that particular line item hadn't been budgeted. And so in trying to make sure we're addressing all line items appropriately, there was an additional $70,000 budgeted in that line item. In terms of benefits, as I had mentioned previously, the employer contribution rate reduced, and that went from 3.79% of total payroll to 3.29% of total payroll, so about a 50 basis point reduction in our employer contribution rate. That generated savings of roughly $325,000. There was a slight increase in terms of benefits of $37,000, and that increase is attributed to the budgeting software we use when we budget wages and benefits uses real-time data. So I could run the calculations today. Somebody goes off of our insurance plan tomorrow, and then I run it 2 days from now, and it will adjust for the actual data that's in there at the time. So this $37,000 is attributed to changes in our health plan that have occurred presently that's changing the projection for next year. So that's the change in the $37,000. The other services, we budgeted Expenditures, so federal programs require that you set aside a certain amount of money for non-public institutions. So this is $43,000 that we put in that will be set aside for non-publics to ensure we had that budgeted. And then finally, $25,000 for contracted nursing services. We've had several conversations about the challenges there, and so we want to be prudent and make sure that we have a fair amount budgeted. So in total, the expenditures actually decreased because of that big retirement reduction, $149,000. I wanted to point out on this slide that you will notice that the district priorities, as well as the deferred maintenance and one-time expenditures, is no longer listed here. And the reason that's not on this slide is that when completing the PDE 2028, which is, again, the supplemental schedule, the form that's required by the state, those priorities need to be actually allocated to the correct category. So they need to be allocated to wages, they need to be allocated to benefits, they need to be allocated to the other services. So I took it out as one sort of big lump and spread it out into the appropriate categories. So if you actually went back and looked at wages in December and looked at the difference to this current budget, you actually see the amount was more than what I had explained or what I had covered here. But primarily that's because of allocating the priorities into the wages category. Same thing with the deferred maintenance. The deferred maintenance was actually plugged in then to the other services. So as you can see there, it was a $2.48 million increase. Well, $2 million of that was those deferred maintenance and other items. As Mrs. Campbell said, the district priorities are the same as were presented in December. There will be a series of presentations on those in January and February. And then, again, the sampling of deferred maintenance and other one-time expenditures. We'll discuss those in March at the same time that we look at the long-range fiscal and capital plan. So finally, or in summary, based on this current status of the proposed preliminary budget, we're recommending that the board consider adoption of a resolution indicating that the district will not raise the rate of any tax by more than the adjusted Act 1 index. Okay. I'd be happy to entertain any questions there may be.
Are there any questions? Dr. Munson?
I have one. It's not really a question. It's just more of a comment or a request. This has come up several times, and as much improved as the budget presentations been in the last couple of years, and I really appreciate all of this, I continue to struggle in understanding the district priorities when one-time costs are lumped together with recurring expenses. And if I understand your explanation of slide 9, that is still happening, although it's even more complicated because now some of the recurring expenses are in wages and so forth. Is it possible to have those things broken out so that we can see what a budget is committing to as a recurring expense versus what we are committing to as a one-time cost?
Yes. In fact, I think in one of our final versions of the long-range fiscal and capital plan, we may have gotten there last year, where we really broke it out and made it very granular so you could see the one-time cost, the recurring cost, the revenue you get from the state, because there is a revenue component tied to these. So I believe when we provide you with the long-range fiscal plan, which would be in March, and hopefully that's well in advance of, considering a budget for final adoption, that information will be included. I would, if it's not satisfactory, please let me know, and certainly we'll try to adjust that.
No, that's great, and I mean, I remember, at least in the last budget cycle, we did end up seeing those. I guess I'm just making a pitch for that division being at a higher level of abstraction and not having to do the deep dive to see that level of granularity. That would be useful to me, at least. I can't speak for the...
Okay.
Are you suggesting on slide 10 that in addition to the $1.72 million, you see what fraction of that?
That would be
Say, is
one
that
step in that direction.
1.3 million is ongoing expenses and 1.42 is, or whatever the breakup is?
Because I find myself getting the calculator out a lot on these slides.
Yes.
Taking that division manually.
And that was on slide 10, where we
Yeah,
would...
so when you're looking at the priorities,
Sure.
knowing what fraction of that is ongoing, and some of these line items might have both a one-time component and an ongoing component. So, okay.
Okay, great.
Mr. Smith?
In a similar vein, while this is all very easy to read, I found myself flipping back and forth between this presentation and the last presentation. I was just thinking about the Future Ready Index and how that's being presented. One of the things, I think, to streamline things a little bit, when you had mentioned in the presentation, some of the items, like on slide 6, anything in red had changed. I found myself going back and, okay, did this change in a positive direction or in a negative direction? So even something as simple as like a red down arrow or a green up arrow, something like that, to say, okay, this has decreased from the last presentation, would save us from having to flip back and forth, and any community members from having to, who may not have been here for the previous presentation, may not have that to look back at. Just a thought.
Okay, great. And that's the challenge of, sometimes you hand out the presentation as you present it because you can really talk to those points, versus handing it out in advance. And so, but great suggestions, certainly have a look at that, thank you.
Mr. Ballard?
Yes, under your presentation of the summary on page 6, you're basically showing a structural deficit of $2 million.
Correct.
Okay? As part of this budget coming up, I would like to know the plan for eliminating that structural deficit, because we can't continue to draw down on capital reserve to keep funding continuous expenses. In other words, we have to have a revenue plan or a spending cut plan to balance that out at some future time when our budgetary reserve is back down a little bit. And so I'd like to understand what the plan is, approximately what year you intend to be neutral on the structural deficit and that type of thing, so I understand how we're going to get out of the continuing decrease of the fund balance problem.
Sure. That structural deficit is intended to be a one-year deficit for 1920 only. And the expenditures directly attributed to that deficit are the deferred maintenance and other one-time expenditures on page 11. And while this is not a comprehensive list, we plan on bringing you a list in March that would be a comprehensive list of all one-time expenditures. So they are things that would occur. We know there would be a structural deficit, but we could take care of a lot of needs that exist that are one-time expenses, as well as manage the fund balance, which is something we heard during the last budget cycle, is that, our fund balance is starting to grow, and so we should be managing that. So it's a one-time expenditure that would not recur in the following year.
Yes, but we've had a structural deficit now for 2 or 3 years, essentially, drawing down the fund balance, and we also have continuing needs for these long-term things as are shown in our 5-year capital budget, that there's going to be things next year that have to be addressed that are also one-time expenses. So we can't keep having one-time expenses that keep drawing down the fund balance, so we have to reach at some point where whatever we're planning to do during the year is equal to or less than the revenue we expect for that year, and that's what I want to understand when that occurs.
Sure. So to address in terms of the recent past, in 2000, the budget for 2017-18 did in fact have a budgeted structural deficit. But in fact, let me go back to the slide 4. There we go. So you can see in the left column, there was indeed a structural deficit of $645,000 budgeted. But you can see when we ended the year, there was actually a surplus of $4.1 million. In the following year, which is the current fiscal year that we're in now, 18-19, you can actually see that there is no structural deficit. It was a balanced budget. So while there were a few years that there was a budgeted structural deficit, I don't know, again, since I've been here, I believe there could have been years before, but since I've been here, we have not actually experienced the structural deficit when the books were audited. And again, as you can see, there's none budgeted for this year. For next year, it is a very deliberate, very well-planned, very calculated deficit. I think it's very important to recognize what you're doing, because it's very easy to attribute things like wages to that do, in fact, lead you in a downward spiral that you have difficulty getting out of. So that's why, again, these are one-time expenses. In terms of, I think, the second part of your comment, the items that are in the long-range plan, the long-range capital plan, we generally have those mapped to, as long as we continue to make the contributions that are scheduled for future years, we have those covered by contributions to capital reserve. And again, we'll be able to see that. We can either pull out last year's capital plan, or we'll be able to see that in March when we get the updated capital plan.
Yes, but that would mean these other one-time expenses, many of which are capital, were not included in that plan.
Correct. That's why I refer to some of these as deferred maintenance, because they're items that each year, when it's time to work on the budget, they are not necessarily big enough to be maybe on the full-blown capital plan, but, well, can we do this? Well, no, there's a higher priority, there's a higher need, and so they haven't been done. So that's why we feel that there are things that need to be addressed. We can't continue to push them down the road. And again, as a way of addressing items that need to be taken care of, as well as managing our fund balance, we feel that this is a prudent plan that we're putting forth.
Well, when you have deferred maintenance, or whatever you want to call it, that amounts to $2 million, and it's not in the long-range capital plan, maybe we should be thinking about having a deferred maintenance category in that plan, so we know where this stuff is accumulating, because it's like the old saying here, a billion here and a billion there, and pretty soon you have some money you can talk about. I mean, this is $2 million, and we really need to know when that's creeping up on us.
Sure. I think the challenge in the past was that our capital reserve fund didn't have a whole lot of cash in it. And so I'm not saying that's an excuse for not looking at these items, but really you sort of plan to what you have available. I mean, we've started to build a contribution where we have a fair amount to be able to address the needs ongoing. I think that's a great suggestion that we certainly should look at.
Yeah, because if it continues to build up, for instance, we know we have a building problem that we need to know about increasing the contributions to the capital reserve to take care of these things, and that's something we need to know for good fiscal planning.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, Mr. Byrd.
I agree with Mr. Ballard. I guess I'm concerned as we move forward that we have these things that we're moving, pulling out of the capital plans, that we're moving forward. If we continue going down that road and pulling out of reserve, I would hope we would try to look at coming up with revenue to balance those capital projects out. Because I think if we continue this way, I think we'll end up with a physical deficit that we may not ever get out of. So I have a great concern about that. I kind of agree with Mr. Ballard, his concerns also.
Sure.
I think, are there any other questions? I think some of it might be historical, that if there are times, what I hear you saying is that we have in our operating expenses sufficient dollars to meet ongoing maintenance needs, but from past cycles, perhaps we've pushed something off.
Correct.
And then that then becomes an extra every year. It wasn't done when it was supposed to be done, and we're sort of accumulating this past and getting rid of it all at once. So your expectation is this isn't just some percentage of our maintenance budget that we don't have included. This is making up for past pushing off.
Right. What you may see some districts do is, again, the curb in the parking lot might be crumbling, okay? And so, is that essential? It's not essential, but it's aesthetic, okay? And so, at some point, you need to address that, because that curb crumbles, then the next curb crumbles, and so, just as an example, you start to have maintenance needs, and some districts will just then go, incur a small amount of debt to try to address all these things at once. What we're suggesting is just using one-time expenses to manage our fund balance.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, what I'm hearing from the board is, let's stay on top of it, that we don't fool ourselves into thinking we have lower maintenance costs and getting in the habit of deferring things and having to resort to something like this.
Absolutely.
In the future.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. Michael.
Moving on, we have the district deputy, Ms. Campbell.
Yes, I am pleased to share that Emmaus High School has returned to relatively normal operations with regard to our room and space usage as a result of the flood that happened in early November. On January 3rd, our regular academic classes in the classrooms that are in the lower 300-500 hallway, which is that hallway adjacent to the main office, our students on January 3rd were able to return to those classes. And additionally, all functions of our main office have resumed as of January 7th, which is pretty remarkable because that was certainly the area of the building that suffered the greatest damage. We have one classroom, room 301, that still has some repairs that need to be done, but RestoreCorps anticipates that their portion of the restoration work at Emmaus High School, and when I say their portion of the restoration work, that includes some cabinet work that we're waiting on, as well as punch list items that were just reviewed this evening. RestoreCorps anticipates that their portion will be completely finished by February 4th. Our district administration continues to complete ordering of materials that were damaged by the flood, and there are several floors, including the weight room and the wrestling room, that will need to be replaced, but we're waiting until the conclusion of that athletic season so as not to cause any further interruption. I'd also like to provide an update on Safe to Say Something. Act 44 is a piece of Pennsylvania legislation that was signed in June of 2018 that specifically relates to school safety and security. And a key mandate of Act 44 requires the Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General to implement a school safety anonymous tip program. And the Office of the Attorney General, in partnership with Sandy Hook Promise, has activated Safe to Say Something, which is that anonymous tip line. And that anonymous tip line is actually active and live today, January 14th, 2019. This is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week anonymous tip line that can be accessed by an app, a website, or a hotline. The tips are triaged, categorized, and delivered to school districts by a crisis center that's managed by trained individuals through the Office of the Attorney General. So each school district across the state has a core team of leaders who will receive the tips. In East Penn, Dr. Mirabella, Mr. Povolitis, and I are the individuals who will be the first point of contact in East Penn, and we will then intervene with those tips as necessary. Our district leadership team, the three of us, were trained in December of 2018, and we are now at the point of recently having received training materials for staff as well as secondary students. This afternoon, we posted the information for parents and guardians on district and building websites, And during the week of January 28th, our secondary students in grades 6 through 12 will have an overview of the Safe to Say program, and that overview will be facilitated by our district leaders. I'm also happy to share that this evening, you may have noticed a slight change to the setup of our boardroom. We moved the podium slightly. Our installation of our recording equipment was completed, and we wanted to be sure that the podium was not in the line of view there. So we are excited that we will begin recording and posting our school board meetings this January 2019. Tonight's meeting is being recorded. It's considered a test of the recording process, and based on this initial recording, the Office of Technology will make any necessary adjustments in preparation for our January 28th meeting. But again, the videos will be posted to the YouTube channel that is available under the School Board tab on the district website. And some celebrations we'd like to highlight that have happened across the district over the past month. Recently, East Penn and Emmaus High School in particular was named to the AP District Honor Roll, and this honor is designated to schools that increase access as well as performance in AP advanced placement programs. Specifically, the honor looks at schools that have not only increased enrollment for AP courses for minority students, but also improving or maintaining the rate at which students scored a 3 or higher on the AP exams. And that AP honor roll recognition looks at 3 years of data, so the most recent 3 years of data from 2016 to 2018. Another congratulations goes out to Emmaus High School students. We had 182 students who were inducted into the National Honor Society on December 11th, 2018. So congratulations to those students, and a great thank you to the National Honor Society advisors, Mrs. Arnold, our National Honor Society faculty honoree and speaker, Mr. Harkness, and also our National Honor Society officers, William Bassett and Nick Creelman, Grace Jansen, and Jenna Kurtz. The EHS Steel Hornets finished 3rd place for the Connect Award at the first Tech Challenge at Oxford High School on January 5th. So our Steel Hornets, our robotics team, will now advance to the state level competition, so good luck to them. A couple announcements. The East Penn School District, it's hard to believe we're already talking about kindergarten registration for the 2019-20 school year. We will hold kindergarten registration the week of March 18th. And in order to be enrolled in kindergarten, just a reminder to families that children must be 5 on or before September 1st of 2019. Information about our kindergarten registration, which is held at all 7 of our elementary buildings throughout the week of March 18th, can be found in the announcements section of our district website, as well as on the building websites. East Penn will be hosting a showing of Screenagers, Growing Up in the Digital Age, and that will be screened on January 22nd. We have a showing at 10 a.m. here at the Administration Building. Reservations are required for the daytime showing. And then we're also showing it at 7 p.m. at Emmaus High School. And Screenagers has been shown by more than 7,000 times to 2 million people in more than 60 countries around the world. Screenagers is the first feature documentary to explore the impact of screen technology on kids and offers parents and families solutions that work. And this really is a must-see for any of us who are parents with young people who are certainly growing up in a digital age. I'd also like to recognize Emmaus High School students who were well represented at Southern Lehigh High School's Healthy Living Expo. Our students created exhibits based around the expo theme of Around the World. In particular, our high school students provided snacks and activities that promoted healthy living from different parts of the world. Many districts and businesses from across Lehigh Valley came together for this great opportunity. So again, a great collaboration between the business world and students. And finally, one reminder that our spring community education classes are now open for registration. So we encourage you to check out those classes and consider taking us up on the opportunity to learn something new. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Campbell? Moving on, we have a motion for revised student-teacher calendar. May I have it moved?
Second.
Discussion, do you want to?
Speaking of the flood, I want to first start off by highlighting an adjustment to the marking periods. This is not something that the board will need to vote on tonight, but we did make an adjustment to the marking period, which is something that that is not necessarily uncommon based on inclement weather days and things like that. But the second marking period has been moved from January 23rd to January 25th, and that was to accommodate instructional time lost during the flood, particularly for those first semester classes. It also we also adjusted our midterm schedule for high school students, so those midterms will now be held on January 22nd through the 24th. The calendar change that we are asking the board to consider this evening is a change to the 18-19 student-teacher calendar. Specifically, we are proposing that Emmaus High School students will have full instructional days on January 25th, February 8th, and May 10th. Please note that the days will remain as early dismissal days for elementary and middle school students. So we are proposing a change for high school students only, and this recommendation is based on the instructional time that we did lose at the high school during the week of November 5th. You might recall that the high school has received a waiver from PDE for the 180-day requirement. However, we are still required to meet the state minimum of 990 hours of instructional time at the secondary level. Currently, Emmaus High School students, this is provided we have no inclement weather days for the rest of the school year. We will complete 985 hours of instruction for the 2018-19 school year, our high school students. The extension of those three what were once half-days or early dismissal days, and by making them full days, that would put our hour count for the high school students at 992 hours. These early dismissal days were originally intended to be professional development days for teachers, and certainly we value professional learning time, as we know our teachers do as well. However, we know that we will have some professional development opportunities that we'll be able to work with our high school teachers, as they will have some time to complete in order to meet their contractual obligations. So that gives you a sense as to the recommendation to take those half-days, make them full days for high school students only. Again, the benefit of gaining the instructional time, particularly during the school year, not waiting to the end of the school year, well before all classes, but particularly thinking about AP exams and when they occur in May. And certainly we will continue to monitor the calendar as we progress through the winter, but keep our fingers crossed. It's been okay so far, and I probably just jinxed us.
Dr. Munson?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Could you please repeat the hour totals? How many are now on the calendar?
Yes.
I missed that.
The calendar as it is, without any extension.
Right.
Our high school students will have 985 hours.
Okay.
The extension of those half-days to full days will put us at 992 for high school students.
Okay, and so, and that's assuming that there are no inclement weather days.
Correct.
So is then, if we do, let's say we're in the likely scenario that we'll have one or more inclement weather days, would the idea then be, there would be a possibility that the high school calendar would be extended while the calendar for the rest of the schools would not be? And that's, what is the thinking about snow?
Our high school team and Mrs. Whitman are well prepared in terms of scenarios. We've played them out from 0 to 5 or more snow days. I'm hoping we don't have to go there. What we're looking at is, obviously then, if we have a snow day, we know that we are back in the situation of having to look at instructional hours for our high school students. So we anticipate then we would look at a day, particularly Thursday, April 18th, that had traditionally been a day when school was closed for all students. That would be, we would then look to that day as an instructional day for high school students only. Again, anytime we're talking about the calendar for right now, we're talking about high school students only. And then past that, we would potentially then have to look at making up days at the end of the year.
And then explain something that I've never actually understood, which is how do these rules apply, these state rules and so forth apply to seniors who graduate before, are the rules just thrown out the window for seniors?
No, they actually also, they apply to all students, but the dilemma is, but the situation is, since we know that our seniors when graduation occurs, we deduct the instructional time from our senior day count and hour count. That does then impact the funding that we receive from the state for just our seniors.
I see. So the district essentially loses state funding because we don't require our graduating seniors to complete all the hours of that academic year.
Correct. It is a minimal amount. I don't have the amount in front of me, but I can certainly get that.
This is not actually directly pertinent to the flood changes because it's always the case that
Correct.
Graduation is before the end of the school year. So, okay, thank you.
Mr. Smith?
I know you said it was kind of a hypothetical, but since you just jinxed us, I'm going to go with the very likely scenario that we're going to have some weather issues. So my question is, snow days I think are probably easier to make up and work around because it impacts everybody. It's a full day schedule. You can tack that on wherever you need to, whether it's April 18th or end of the year. But what do you anticipate happening if we need to have a 2-hour delay when we are up against the wall?
2 hours.
On hours. Like, you can't just say, come in for 2 hours on June whatever.
Right. I have to tell you, this has been such a great learning experience for all of us. Laura, Jim, Frank, and I have had a lot of conversations about what counts as, what's deducted, what's not. Correct me if I'm wrong, but any delayed openings and or early dismissals do not count against our hour count.
Correct.
For weather, they are not deducted.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Which is bizarre.
That's state government.
Yes.
Ms. Bowman?
Just a clarification, so the snow day that we had not too long ago is already baked into these hours?
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay, and then could you explain how you're going to make this clear to parents of high school kids who are invariably going to be confused, particularly when some schools are in session and others are not?
I think we will rely on transportation, communication. We will rely on our communication channels that we have in the past. So what I mean by that is our websites, social media. I anticipate that it would be a call potentially that our high school administration would use, would make using our notification system.
Sounds good.
I can appreciate from a family's perspective who potentially has students at the high school as well as other levels, that it might be an inconvenience to have kids on different schedules. And that's certainly something that we have considered, but ultimately when we look at the value of gaining instructional time during the school year, that was our priority.
Yep.
Mr. Ballard?
Yes, do we have plans to, some way on our website or all our communications channels, convey this set of information to the parents? In other words, that right now, if we're taking up these 3 days, this is not for snow days, this is for flood days, and if we have another snow day, one more snow day, we're going to have to take up April 18th. And if we have any more than that, we're going to have to take day for day, a day in June to lengthen out the school year for high school students only. And other schools will only be lengthened when they exceed the number of snow days in the calendar type of thing, because it's going to be different for the elementary and the high school, and we really ought to get this information out as many months in advance as we can so people aren't surprised that April 18th is going to disappear, like for the possible snowstorm coming in Friday night, Saturday, I see in the weather forecast, that type of thing. So we know that, hey, this is going to happen if we have these many snow days, and this is the plan, and get it out to them much in advance rather than waiting for them to be surprised by a phone call the night before saying, we have a snow day tomorrow, that means you'll be going till June, 15th or whatever.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about a communication plan that will to the greatest extent possible, avoid any confusion in terms of giving parents notification as to if there is a snow day, Emmaus High School students would be asked to report on, this particular day would be an instructional day.
One snow day, April 18th disappears. 2 snow days, you're going on June, whatever it is, 8th or 9th or whatever. 3 snow days, it's the 10th, and so forth, so that we have that all laid out for them.
Sure.
Well, that's already built into the calendar that's public on the website. And at the bottom, it's got 4/18, 6/12 through 6/18, right?
Correct. I think the difference would be if we have one snow day, it does not impact our elementary or middle school students.
There are 3 days built into the calendar right now.
And if we have another snow day, it does impact our high school students. And so, thank you, Mr. Smith, for pointing out that, yes, that April 18th day was already identified as what would be a snow makeup day, which is why we went there for the high school. But
it's not.
We have like parallel paths running here. We have the elementary and middle school path, and then we have the high school path.
Yeah.
Ms. Bowman?
I did want to mention how that personally as a parent, I appreciate that the days are being made up during the school year as opposed to being tacked on to the end. This is like the best case scenario of a scenario that none of us really wanted to see, but obviously Mother Nature had other plans for us. But at least they're happening at a time of year when students are most apt to learn their material, which is good. And just from reading comments online, it's kind of obvious to me that parents are already confused somewhat because it was reported that that the school days were waived, and so they thought that nothing was going to happen. And now we're adding these half days, which is something that we need to do, and obviously it's a good thing, and I'm not arguing that at all, but I think we already have people in a state of confusion, so it will take a lot of communication to undo some of that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Dr. Levinson?
Well, I was just going to say that my 2 high schoolers are all for additional instructional times. So I will be agreeing to this change.
They might not want you to say that in public.
I want to see that in writing.
Watching on video now, right?
Good one.
And I'd like to echo Ms. Bowman's comments that also for classes that have, like AP classes that have a fixed testing schedule, I think the days before the testing are a lot more valuable than ones at the end of the year. Okay, if there are no more comments or questions, Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Mr. Ballard?
Aye.
Ms. Baumann?
Aye.
Mr. Byrd?
Aye.
Mr. Champagne?
Aye.
Dr. Levinson?
Aye.
Dr. Munson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Bacher?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Motion passes. Next, I'll entertain a motion for personnel, items A through P.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Champagne?
I was just curious. It seems like for a number of months now, we've been going through a lot of special ed people. We've lost some administrator type. Now we're losing some other, people in the special ed area. Is there something that's triggering some of this, or is it just burnout, or is there anything you can add to that?
I'm looking at the special ed that's on here, and I'm seeing transfers. Are there others that you're?
General leave of absence, you've got 2 of those, and you got the transfers, and I think there was an administrator at the middle school level or something like that not too recently that also left. I'm just curious, are we struggling to find people and keep people, or is there some reason that it's very important, and I'm just wondering if there's anything going on that we should be aware of?
Dr. Pekarik, any further feedback, any further comments you have, certainly feel free to add. I know in general, when we have conversations as a superintendent's cabinet with our IU, hiring, finding qualified individuals is certainly something that's very tricky, particularly in those specialty content areas, including special education. Looking at some of the changes that we have on ours, whether they're general leave, those would be for personal reasons, and then the transfers are really, I believe, just programmatic reasons in terms of, matching skill set with program needs. But Linda, anything further, please? It's a long walk to the podium now. So the only other comment that I have is we have lost a lot of instructional assistants, and we are having a very difficult time replacing them. And I really think it goes back to possibly the salary issue. So they do not get paid a high salary, and there are other districts in the area that pay a little bit higher than us. So I think that, is something we're struggling with as a district.
What is the differential? Are we talking?
I think some other districts pay probably $3 an hour higher than we do. Wow. I know the IU pays a little bit more than we do, and some folks have left to go to IU programs.
I think that's something, if, we're struggling to keep in good people, I know salary increases are always a touchy subject, but I think we should be looking at that in this upcoming budget process to identify if that's a shortcoming that we're having to keep the people we need. We may need to address that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Ballard?
Yeah, just for the record, the Linda Ballard on page 2 under Part C is not a direct relative of mine that I know of.
Any other comments? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
Dr. Munson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
Ms. Baumann.
Aye.
Mr. Byrd.
Aye.
Mr. Champagne.
Aye.
Dr. Barker.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to business operations, I'll entertain a motion for items A through E.
So moved.
Second.
And discussion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
Ms. Baumann.
Aye.
Mr. Byrd.
Aye.
Mr. Champagne.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
Dr. Munson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Dr. Barker.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Motion passes. I'll now entertain a motion for the resolution not to exceed the index.
So moved.
Second.
I hope you got that. Who said what? Any discussion? Mr. Ballard?
I would just like to ask the solicitor, do we need to have this read as the adjusted Act 1 index?
No, it's fine the way it is.
Okay.
Any other comments? I'd like to thank the business office for their work on the budget so far, and I'm happy to see that we're able to propose such a resolution. Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
Ms. Baumann.
Aye.
Mr. Byrd.
Aye.
Mr. Champagne.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
Dr. Munson.
Aye.
Dr. Barker.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Motion passes. For curriculum, there's been an adjustment. One of the attendees for the conference on pesticides, Joel Gogler, will not be attending that conference, so we'll adjust the list accordingly. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Allen, will you call the roll?
Mr. Champagne.
Aye.
Dr. Levinson.
Aye.
Dr. Munson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
Ms. Baumann.
Aye.
Mr. Byrd.
Aye.
Dr. Barker.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Motion passes. Moving on to policy. I didn't see any requests by email. I'll just, do you have any changes? Administration has not made any changes to the policies from our previous meeting. Okay, so rather than going, well, there's only 2, but rather than going through them individually, I'll just ask if any board members have any comments on either of the policies. Okay, then we'll move on, and at the next meeting, we'll have a motion to approve on the third reading. Okay, So other educational entities, Ms. Bowman, do you have a report for the CLIU?
I actually was not at the last meeting. I was working in the city that day, but I did get an update. The proposed budget was passed that day. There's no increase for district contribution. They kept medical expenses flat. Hold on a second, gotta put my glasses on. And then passed some, most of the increases were in salaries, 3.1% for teachers, 2.9% Act 9, 2.3% for support staff. And then this will be coming to us for our approval. I'm not exactly sure how that process works, so perhaps offline someone can tell me if I need to actually do something or not. Okay, thank you.
Any questions from Ms. Bowman? Moving on to LCTI, Mr. Champagne, do you have a report?
Yes, the last meeting was held on December 12th. There was an election of the chairman and vice chairman of the Joint Operating Committee. Frank Frankenfield of Salisbury was reappointed as chairman his second year, and out of the 2-year, he can be chairman. And Gary Fedorcha of Northern Lehigh was reappointed vice chairman his second year also. We also, after a lot of discussion, approved the contracts for the new welding lab addition. The general mechanical and plumbing contracts were all awarded. One of the things that we did have to struggle with was that the cost of the welding lab went up significantly. It was coming in at a little over $4.25 million versus a budget of roughly $3.6 million, so an exceeded budget by roughly 20%. Some of that was due to scope change, but the biggest changes were due to a very tight labor market for construction and increased material costs. So as we're looking at capital projects, be it the field, be it anything else, just be aware that the labor market for a lot of that stuff, at least what we found, is very tight, and that material costs have gone up significantly. We were able to cover that budget change. We had E-rate dollars that we had received because we were able to file for them for the technology improvements that we made, and we reallocated a portion of the bond proceeds that we had to raise to cover the welding lab and other expenditures to cover this overage. And they also, well, there was provided a revised budget presentation. The general operating fund, there was no change from what I presented back in December at this meeting. East Penn's allocated cost went up a little over $16,000 between the 18-19 budget and the academic center. Our costs went up about $170,000. That's due to how the 5-year average enrollment calculation is used. So that budget, I think, will be coming to this board in January, the next meeting, I believe. But I'll have to double check on that.
No, it usually doesn't come until March.
To March? Okay, maybe we're seeing it again at LCTI. Okay, very good. That's all.
Any questions for Mr. Champagne? I have one. The scope of the welding lab upgrades, are those increasing the number of students served or increasing the capabilities of the lab, or do you know what both?
Yeah, the facility will have a lot better layout in terms of the kids being able to obviously get trained, but it'll essentially more than double the amount of students that we can handle in the welding program, because there is a backlog of kids wanting to get into that welding program.
Originally, it was going to be about doubling it, and you're saying it's expanded from?
No, it's still the same size in terms of, it's doubling the number of students that can get in the program.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to legislative, Mr. Ballard.
Well, I hesitate to use the word unfortunately, but the legislature is back in session. And right now, what's pouring into the legislative hoppers are everybody whose bill didn't get passed last session and is still in office is putting out a support letter or the term escapes me right at the moment, but they circulate these around to various other senators or representatives, ask them to sign on, and then they dump the bill into the hopper of the Education Committee, for example, and say, well, we brought it up again. Prospects for many of these are the same as they were last year, so I have no idea of telling you which ones may go on, but that's the kind of thing that's happening right now. The Governor will be giving his budget address in early February. We'll hear what his proposal is, and then we'll hear the reaction of the still Republican majority in both houses as to, how they react to his proposals, and we'll see where things go from there. The main kind of activities going on right now are two entities, PSERS and the State Board of Education. I'll try to give you a quick update on those. The PSERS board has set the annual employer contribution rate of 34.29% for fiscal year 2019-20, which begins on July 1, 2019. That is a jump this year from 33.43% that it was. That's almost a percent. The projected employer contribution rates moving forward continue to climb as follows. 34.77% is projected for 2020-21, 35.19% for 2021-22, and 35.84% for 2022-23, and 36.30% for 2023 and 24. Over 75% of this employer contribution rate is for the payment of the unfunded liability, which the state legislature has not addressed. And it's primarily debt for past service already earned by members. So that is a given debt that is the responsibility of the state. The only saving grace of this is that it pains the state as much as it pains us, because for us, they pay half of ours, so their half is going up. And for the SERS, the State Employees Retirement System, they pay the full boat for that, and it has the same rates, basically. So that's going up, and it's not going up as it has in prior years because we're sort of plateauing out on that, but it is still going up, and we'll have to worry about that because at rates of 33 to 35%, that's a pretty hefty addition to our employee costs every year that we have to maintain. The State Board of Education is considering various issues, including guidelines for new graduation requirements that were put out on Act 158 of 2018. And PDE has been updating the board on what it requires. And Act 158 created options for students who are not proficient on the 3 Keystone exams in algebra, literature, and biology to use something else to use to meet the standards of graduation. And there's alternative assessments and projects and various other things that they're now considering for part of the implementation of that. PDE also updated the state board on the state implementation of ESSA, which, as you know, is a federal law, and it last month released its list of schools that were failing to make the ESSA index, and they're calling them schools identified for comprehensive support and improvement, CSI, and schools identified for additional targeted support and improvement. That will play out over the next year. There's many other issues of the ESSA implementation that they're discussing with various state agencies and trying to come up with a plan. They're also looking at process changes on Safe Schools memorandums of understanding. So they'll be working on trying to get those established in a standard format and getting progress on getting every local educational agency in the state on board with having MOUs with all of the law enforcement services that interact with their district, which in our case would be, the borough police departments and the state police. They're also looking at, they're going to have public hearings on proposed changes to Chapter 49 regulations with the certifications of professional personnel. They've changed the categories for those, and so they'll be dealing with those. There's also Chapter 16 regulations for special education for gifted students that they're considering, including dedicated state funding for gifted education, and they've decided that's not within the authority of the board to change. They're going to put out a report for the legislature and PDE and see if anything can change there. And there's a report out that they've received on the state implementation of the Federal Perkins Act, and it takes effect, the new one takes effect on July 1st, 2019, and they have to submit a one-year transition plan to be followed by a 4-year state plan for this to meet the requirements of that. And they will begin, they have to put the interim report in by April 2019, and they're going to start in March for the 4-year plan, which has to be put out by April of 2020. Other than that, the legislature has named new chairman for the Education Committee and so forth, and hasn't made much change in the ideology that was in place for the Republican majority members of those committees, although we can still be grateful that Andy Dinneman is still the minority chairman on the Education Committee. He's a great champion of public education. So other than that, like I said, there's nothing to major on the actual legislative front, but hold your hats on because anything's possible in this next year. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Ballard? Okay, moving on, Ms. Bowman requested a discussion on pedestrian safety.
Okay.
You want to
Thank
start
you.
off?
Earlier this month, as many people probably know from the newspaper, one of our students was hit by a car while she was walking to school. I happened to be in the car behind the car that hit her, so I was the third person on the scene. The driver was there shaking, saying he didn't see her over and over again, really totally in shock. She was laying in the street in the gutter, and thankfully a staff assistant was in the car in front of me who also happened to be trained in first aid and was incredibly helpful, in addition to a paramedic who lived nearby who came running out of his house half-dressed to help her. The thing that struck me the most was how dark it was. This is a section of Harrison that for whatever reason really doesn't have any streetlights, and I don't understand exactly how that happened. The rest of Harrison has them. This block and a half, 2-block section does not. It was 6:50, 6:55 in the morning. I was very close to this accident and with cars with flashers in front of me, and I couldn't figure out what was laying in the road. I thought it was a piece of debris. That's how dark it was. When the driver said he didn't see her, I know he didn't. You couldn't see anything. She was dressed in dark clothing, which made it even harder to see. And then I looked and realized we had a car accident with one of our kids almost exactly a year ago at the same time of day in the same location. From what I understand, both children are not very harmed. They are okay. But I feel like we as a district have gotten incredibly lucky twice. And it's time for us to take some very careful consideration of what we can do to improve student safety, whether it's pedestrian safety, bus stop safety, safety on our buses on the way to school, and crosswalk safety and things like that. These things are all technically off school property, but I think there's probably, if we get creative, things we can do to improve that environment for our students. I live about a mile from the school, and my son walks that mile to school most days. Actually, on the day that this accident happened, I was driving him to school, but he leaves takes 20 minutes to walk, so at 6:40 in the morning, probably from the beginning of December, if not earlier, to at least mid-January. It's pitch black at that time of day. That's a 20-minute walk in the dark to school. And we have dozens of students walking down Burger Street and down Harrison, one of the busiest streets in town, in the dark. I raised this question online and heard from parents who had watched children almost get hit in the crosswalks around the high school. Now that I've been paying attention, I've seen this too, cars not even attempting to slow down as the students are, we have one guard who does the crosswalk between the student lot and the school. I'm mostly talking about the crosswalks that don't have crossing guards. And cars just pretty much not stopping. And then other safety concerns, so many different people raised. If you ask parents about safety, you'll hear dozens of things will come up, whether it's students sitting 3 to a seat in a school bus, to various dangerous bus stops that we have, where many parents say that they don't let their kids actually go to the stop until they see the bus coming down the street because it's too dark and they don't want their children standing near the street at that time of day. So I do feel like this is something that we need to take a very close look at. I'm not proposing any solutions, although I would hope that we would take a look at some of the more tough solutions and make sure we thoroughly consider them. And by tough, I mean taking a really close look at whether we should change our start times. In addition to safety, there's lots of research that shifting the start time for middle and high school to 8:30 or later actually improves test score and mental health. The American Academy of Pediatrics actually recommends that middle and high schools start no earlier than 8:30, and we're starting at 7:20. I'm not saying that that's the only solution or that I'm married to it, but I just want us to consider it and weigh all the pros and cons, and in addition to any other solutions that the administration might find, whether it's working with the borough for better lighting, or maybe making an easy way for parents to report safety hazards when they see them. There might be dozens of other things you might come up with. So that's it.
Do you want to comment on?
Wait for more discussion.
Mr. Ballard?
I can understand and sympathize with the viewpoint of parents looking at this, but I'm concerned from a different standpoint. I guess you call it a strict constructionist one, I don't know. Some of the things that you're talking about are not in the purview of the school district. From a very straightforward legal standpoint, we are not responsible, unless we are transporting them on our buses, for the safety of students on their way to school. That is still the parents, and in some cases, places like the boroughs and the townships, for that kind of thing. It's just as the way it is on bus stops. We are prohibited from doing a lot of things without engaging the other legal entities who have responsibility for that, from doing things. We can't put up street signs to tell people to slow down. We can't even put those pedestrian markers in the street without getting permission from whoever is responsible for the street, which could either be PennDOT or the municipalities, because we're not allowed legally to infringe on their rights to control their street environment. So many of these things that you've been talking about are not something that the school district can address directly. It might be possible to identify these issues if we have one that we can point to solid evidence that there's a problem and bring it up with the municipal authorities. But beyond that, sending them a letter saying, we think this is a problem, just as the crossing guards are the responsibility of the municipalities, although in some cases under certain state law for Lower McConchy Township, we have to pay half of them their salary, the still responsibility for those particular safety issues reside with other political entities over which we do not have any authority or control. So in some cases, I think it's misdirected to ask the school district to be the only one looking at those particular issues. If parents have an issue with the safety of the streets in their municipality, they should be petitioning the one entity that can actually do something about it, which is their municipality, and getting that information to them. If it's brought to our attention, like I said, we might be able to, do some administrative letter writing, something like that, but anything beyond that is causing a couple of issues. One is the sovereignty issue, and the other is a legal liability issue. If we insert ourselves into some of these issues, we are giving an opening for some creative attorney to decide that that also means we're responsible, even though we might have some argument to say that we're not, but we'll end up in court trying to argue that out where we shouldn't be doing that at all. So I'm very hesitant to say that forward on this without having a very hard look at what it is that we are allowed to do and would not engage ourselves in additional liability. So from that standpoint, this discussion is somewhat, like I said, out of the purview of the school district, and I'm not sure how much further it should go.
Mr. Smith?
First, I'd like to thank Ms. Bowman for bringing this up. I think it's an important discussion to have. Just before I get to my comments, to respond to what Mr. Ballard had suggested, while I agree that there are probably some legal challenges to something like this, I still think that it's worth having the conversation just to explore what avenues are available to us when our charge is the health and safety of our students. When you think about some of the other rights that we have and we don't have the right to tell parents what the limit of screen time is that their kids need to be having on their devices, but we're still in the process right now of educating the community about the dangers of overuse of those devices. Now, that might be a large leap from a pedestrian accident on Harrison Avenue. However, it's the same, in my mind, the same discussion that needs to be had in educating, whether it's the dangers, educating the community about the dangers of not crossing in a crosswalk, or educating the municipalities about some of the deficiencies in lighting on a particular stretch of road. I think that's all part of what our responsibility could entail in terms of educating others. As far as my own thoughts, we can take a look at, what we can do. Granted, it might not be much, but in terms of sharing ideas with municipalities, okay, so what are we looking at? Are we looking at traffic remediation ideas? They put speed humps in on Mill Creek and slowed traffic down there. Yeah, we're not going to be responsible for installing those, but at the same time, those come with their own challenges. Now, if we put something like that in, whatever it may be, even if it's not speed humps, if it's more stop signs, if whatever that might be, are we now going to be sending traffic out, cutting through the local neighborhoods to get around those things? Are we causing a larger problem by trying to fix this one? So that's all part of something that can be fleshed out in a larger discussion. My wonder is if this is going to become a larger conversation about school start times. I have read all the research, not all the research, there's a lot out there, but I'm familiar with the research of high school start times. And from a logistical standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. From what's best for kids, it makes a lot of sense. Let me back up. From a logistical sense, it may not make as much sense as we would hope, or not, at least without a lot of challenges along the way. I think it's, again, worth having the conversation, but the things we have to think about are, well, yes, it would be may very well be what's best for kids. We have high school students that have after-school jobs that would need to have, there's a logistic issue there. School sports, well, now we have other districts that are becoming involved because those school sports teams, their games are scheduled at a certain time when other high schools may be running at a standard, very early start time. Not to mention the LCTI and CLIU, who have several districts that they work with. So I think that some of the things that we may potentially end up discussing are, we are very limited in what we can do as a district specifically and unilaterally. It's going to require quite a lot of conversations that go outside of this room, and a lot of coordination between the folks that are involved. So that's the start of my thoughts, and hopefully I'll be able to share more as we have a further discussion later on. Thank you.
Dr. Munson?
Yeah, I too would thank Ms. Bowman for bringing up this issue. I had sort of two reactions to what's been said so far. The first is to Mr. Ballard's point. I agree with Mr. Ballard that I think most of the best solutions to these pedestrian problems are outside the direct purview of the district, but at the same time, I think they are worth discussing, as has been said before, because we do have the capacity to act in an advisory role to other political entities, and the school district bringing up a problem with our municipalities, which we have very good relationships with, carries some weight. Doesn't mean that we have the solutions, but even bringing the problem to their attention in a formal way after due deliberation here can lead to improvements on, for example, asking the Borough of Emmaus why we have a block and a half of Harrison that's not lit, for example. They're not our lights, it's not our street, but it's not only our students, but it's the students of the Borough of Emmaus as well. I guess my second reaction is this issue of start times. I am 120% in favor of having that discussion. I too have I have this thick folder of material that I've been collecting about this. But I have to say, I do think it's a separate discussion. It is not clear to me that start times are related to safety. Changing start times is more likely to change which students are at risk rather than that students are at risk, and it's more likely to change at what time of day, before or after school, they're at risk, given the light. So while I want to have that discussion, and I think there's lots of good reasons, some of which have already been outlined by Mr. Smith and Ms. Bowman, for really rethinking and getting a little further outside the box in terms of our scheduling, I'm not sure that actually is, I haven't heard or seen any evidence that that would actually improve safety or solve the problems that were mentioned. I will say my daughter walks to school along that stretch of Harrison. I'm often on the road at that time too, and since the accident, I have noticed at that time of day that kind of gray light and how difficult it is to see, and so it's a real problem, but we can't solve the problem of human eyesight limitations at certain times of day.
Any other comments from the board?
I guess it's okay if I just follow up. I was trying to make clear that I'm not really married to any particular solution, as much as I want us to explore all of the possibilities, including working with local municipalities to solve them or encourage them to solve them. It is hard to separate my role as a parent from my role as a board member, but I'm in favor of making every part of our children's lives safer, regardless of the liability of doing so, and regardless of whether it's technically not in our purview. it's very simple things like encouraging parents to tell us about things that aren't safe. Another example, something that is completely within our purview that we can do something about, we have cross-country kids running in the dark without reflective gear. We can do something about that. We can do something about 3 kids to a seat in a bus. And there's some things that we can't do something about, but all I'm asking is that we look at it and do everything we possibly can to prevent a tragedy in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Campbell, do you have some comments?
I do. I want to first start off by saying that we too, Emmaus High School in the district, was certainly very concerned about the recent accident involving one of our students. It just so happened to be a pedestrian accident. We have the same level of concern when it might be an automobile accident. I agree, Mr. Smith, I think you were the one who articulated, as several others of our board did as well. I do believe that we have an obligation to be attentive to the academic, social, emotional, and the physical well-being of our children. What I've heard in general from the feedback from the board this evening was that the administration would investigate safety and security, not only from a walking perspective, but perhaps just this, traveling to school. And certainly, I also agree that the start time conversation could be, is a topic potentially for us to look at in greater detail outside and a part of this particular conversation. I also agree that, as many of you articulated about looking at start times and some of the research that is out there with regard to, in some ways, school systems sort of have the normal biological start times flipped, and that we're asking our kids who need to start a bit later to start earlier. But Dr. Munson, I agree with you as well in terms of connecting it to a safety perspective. It may actually just create a problem at the other end. I do think the power in conversations such as that, and we had a recent conversation with our IU executive director about this, is potentially like the county level conversations, because you're right, Mr. Smith, when we start talking about tinkering with start times, it does impact many facets of a child's life. And so I think there's great power and ability to potentially impact change in the future when we can include other school districts in those conversations. So to get back to the topic of student safety, what I hear the board asking is potentially for administration to look into ways in which we can make our students' time not only here, but also to and from school more safe, recognizing that there are some things over which we very easily might have some ability to influence. There might be some things that are certainly much trickier, but I agree with, I think it was Dr. Munson who highlighted, I'm very proud of the great collaborative relationships that East Penn has traditionally had and we continue to maintain with our local boroughs as well as the township. Certainly we can look at things, we always encourage parents when there is a concern about, like we had some things mentioned tonight about an excessive number of students to a seat or a bus stop being unsafe. I believe that parents hopefully see us as being receptive and open to that feedback. I know that Dr. Mirabella, when he receives such concerns or requests, is really on those, and we're looking into bus stops and number of students per seat. But if there's a way that we can continue to monitor that and be better at what we're doing than we currently are, we're certainly open to that. The other piece that I wanted to mention, and this is really exclusive to things such as pedestrian and bicycle safety, it actually is a state standard. Pedestrian safety is also included as part of our first grade health, wellness, fitness curriculum. And in preparation for tonight's discussion, I was trying to do a little bit of research. And so the one time that we very intentionally and deliberately speak to our students about being mindful and safe while they're walking to and from school, I can tell you it's in first grade, and many of our buildings do a follow-up in second grade, but I don't know beyond that we really do much follow-up. And so sometimes I think, Ms. Baumann, that's potentially some of the things that you're talking about, that there may be some, I don't want to say easy solutions, but some really simple things that we can do just in terms of reminding young people about the importance of safety at all times. Even if you're a 15-year-old and walking to school, we have to be mindful of that traffic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you. I think it was a good discussion. Moving forward to announcements, school and offices are closed on Monday, January 21st. Our next regular meeting will be on Monday, January 28th at 7:30 PM here, to be posted on the YouTube channel. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.